The fallen state is a concept that is associated with only religion. This is the state at which the Christian religion refers to as the sinful nature or the fallen nature. The fallen nature, however, can be accounted for under the hermetic metaphysics. Furthermore, just as the fallen state can be accounted for, there is also a way to account for how one gets out of such a fallen state. In this video, I want to go over and explain the metaphysics of the fallen state, as well as the metaphysics of salvation. This will be important to provide us some clues as to which religion actually gets salvation correct. If there is one thing that all world religions share in common, it's that there is a concept of a fallen nature. Any other doctrine is irrelevant to the nature of which religion is true, mainly because if there is no salvation, then there is no religion. The purpose of religion is to save someone from something, or at least that God would be part of that process. Despite the great diversity of world religions, there's actually something they can actually agree on, which is the fallen state. However, they will disagree about how one escapes from the fallen state. I want to make this point clear. Salvation is the supreme doctrine and the supreme purpose for why one wants to follow any particular religion at all. So, while it may be right to point out that there are many religions, if one wants to truly judge religion from an objective standpoint, the best way to do that is to see which salvation method has it right. Now, to begin, the concept of the fallen state in religion is that the world, or at least the human condition, was once free of both external evil in the form of pain and suffering, as well as from the internal evil in the form of human vices. This was said to have changed, however, during the fall of man, into a state which has both external suffering and inner evil in man. Within Hermeticism, as within so without, becomes important, because the outer world of all moral and natural evil mirrors the inner evil in the form of vice and ill will. God, of course, is the mind of the all. The mind of the all is good out of necessity, as it is the originator of all other conceptions of good and all other emanated minds. Thus, no perspective in any lesser mind could disagree with the goodness of the mind of the all, if it were only sufficiently enlightened. As a result, God being good only creates or emanates what is good. However, evil does exist. Evil must therefore be parasitic on good, existing as a contingent thing. For there to be evil, there must first be good. When we apply this understanding to as within so without, we discover something very recognizable about the fallen state. States in the inner mental space exist as knowledge, whereas their corresponding states in the physical outer space are things in themselves. Thus, if we are to ask where evil arises from in the world, it must come from the source of the simulation, which is the inner space and the states of knowledge within it. Thus, physical evil must be the product of knowledge of evil and the collective inner mental plane. As evil cannot exist without good, we further see that the existence of evil in the world is due to the knowledge of good and evil existing in the mental inner plane. This is immediately obvious and is connected to the Garden of Eden story, where a man causes the fall by knowing the knowledge of good and evil. When we dig a little deeper, we discover many other features of a fallen state arising. First, if we ask what evil is, we find that it is not an emanation from the all, so then it must be a lack. But things cannot go missing from the totality. The totality remains the totality, and thus by its very nature, nothing can go missing from all that is. Thus, it must be a relative lack of a single thing missing from some other thing. The product of a distortion in the good is when something good has been broken apart such that it is missing a part of what makes it good. But what is a broken thing to produce this evil state? Well, if we apply the principle of mentalism, we see that it is the states of consciousness that are broken. However, this is not always apparent in the physical world. A broken window is bad, but so is a murderer who apparently does not have any broken pieces. However, if we apply the principle of mentalism and correspondence, then we see that the evil in the world, or the evil in the outer world, is the product of evil in the inner world. Thus, it is consciousness broken down in the mental inner world. These inner planes are the same as the emanating world that the physical plane comes from, which is veiled from the physical senses. This replicates yet another aspect of the fallen state described from Kabbalah, which is the shattering of the vessels. As we saw in our previous video, when we explained the hermetic Kabbalah, or the tree of life, Hermeticism and Kabbalah can mesh together very nicely. The emanating world of Kabbalah is the inner world of Hermeticism, and according to Kabbalah, we see the physical world as a kind of veil concealing the true emanating world. This matches how we can see the quantum world as a veiled reality from which our senses only see the other side of the veil. The fall on Kabbalah is described within this emanating world in terms of broken emanations from God called Kulifiite. The event which brought about this is referred to as the shattering of the vessels, and describes the shattering of consciousness and the veiled reality of the emanating world. This consciousness is broken down, can be thought of in scientific terms as broken states of entanglement in the Hilbert space beyond spacetime. Now, given this framework, the reader can now see how the contrasting unfallen state is absent of evil both of the inner world of the mind and the external physical world. In a perfectly unfallen state, all the minds will be entangled with each other in an unbroken fashion. In such a state, all such minds would automatically share introspective states through entanglement, and thus this unfallen state would correspond to a high degree of PSI in the form of telepathy. As a consequence, this would cause everyone to experience the pain and pleasures of everyone else. Thus, there would be no desire to inflict such pains in the form of human evil, as it would be pain inflicting against oneself as well. Likewise, all would seek the good of each other, and all would experience this good through this collective introspective link. Furthermore, when it comes to natural evil, the link of each mind to the mind of the all, which is the spiritual connection to God, would account for the absence of natural evil. As a mind would have connection to the mind behind the simulation, so then the needs of the lesser minds could influence the environment of the simulation in a manner akin to telekinesis. This would in turn eliminate the uncontrolled natural element that creates natural evil within the mental construction of physical reality. Now, I should be clear that the fallen state occurs in degrees. So it may not be the case that here on Earth that there is no biological death or eradication of all illnesses before the fall. There was, however, a greater degree of spiritual connection, and with it a greater mental influence over the natural elements, resulted in less of a need to rely upon tools of technology and the like. Now, given the fallen state could be accounted for in terms of metaphysics, let's look at comparative religion and see how all the major world religions actually do teach this same concept of the fallen state. In the Abrahamic traditions, which is Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there is a belief in the fall of man, and it is from this tradition that the fallen state is primarily known. This fall is caused by the knowledge of good and evil. It resulted in both inner evil, sometimes called original sin, as well as natural evil, often called the curse. However, it is worthwhile to note that the emphasis on forgiveness in these traditions are very important, as forgiveness is what reunifies the broken fragments of consciousness compromising the fallen state, as well as reconnecting these broken pieces with God. In Eastern religion, there is Hinduism and Buddhism, which has true primary examples of the fallen state as well. In Hinduism, the concept of duality and Maya are relevant. Duality is a state of consciousness and separation. Here, minds see each other as different, rather than confined in a state of ava or non-duality. This is merely another description of the fractional entanglement compromising the fallen state discussed earlier. While in the state, the minds are under Maya or the veil of illusion, referring to the illusion of the material world. This is also a logical consequence of the fallen state, as the fallen minds no longer have introspective access to the mind of the all that generates the physical world. Lacking this connection to the mind behind the simulation, they also lack the direct awareness that would go on with such a connection. Furthermore, in Buddhism, there is a concept of ego consciousness, and the goal of Buddhism is to transcend the state of ego into enlightenment. Ego consciousness refers to ego and separation, again paralleling with the fallen state as described in terms of fractured consciousness. The fallen state in Kabbalah is described as a cosmic catastrophe and the emanating world behind the veil of physical reality. As we've explained before, this is simply the shatter in the vessels and the various emanations of God that are broken into shatter fragments called Clephyite. Finally, Hermeticism itself has a unique description of the fallen state. This is found in relation to the principle of vibration, which we will explore more in a later video. In Hermeticism, the fallen state is associated with a drop in vibration, whereas an unfallen state, or perhaps a lesser fallen state, corresponds to raised vibrations. This is due to the rate of vibration and wave function increasing when there are more states or energy contained within them and decreasing when there are fewer. The entangled state of the unfallen state, having more conscious agents within it, has a higher vibration than the fallen, disentangled state. With a full understanding of the fallen state, we see that the fallen state is an inner condition of the mind by bringing fractured consciousness, and this is parallel throughout world religions. The real question we need to ask is, how is salvation achieved? In other words, how does one go from a fallen state to an unfallen state? To escape from the fallen state, one can only achieve it through the help of the mind of the all. Only God is perfectly beyond ego or separation, and thus only God can release one from such a state of separation. One cannot do it oneself any more than one can open a door by at the same time pushing against it with one's feet to gain leverage. This is for precisely the similar reason that all motivations to escape the inner fallen state arise from within the inner fallen state. In other words, in order to escape from one's own inner fallen state, then it must be fixed from outside the inner fallen state. Any attempt to try to escape from the fallen state through one's own effort, one must first use the inner fallen state to achieve that goal. However, doing so will still result in an inner fallen state being present. It is an inescapable loop that cannot be overridden by one's own efforts. Only God, who is both powerful enough and is perfectly unfallen, can be the one that can change someone from outside the fallen state in order to reverse the fallen state completely, so then over time they may eventually escape from the inner fallen state loop. No finite priests, angels, moral efforts, guides, or religious institutions can accomplish this for the same reason. Only God, and only God alone, has the power to save minds from the fallen state. Now, as we mentioned before, there are degrees in the fallen state. This accounts for the fact that death was both present in the world before the fall, as we've been over that the fallen state corresponds to the conscious elements in the collective inner mental plane being broken apart and disordered. The degree to which they are disordered represents the degree to which the fallen state is fallen. In some cases, one could live in a relatively unfallen state, such that one has a spiritual connection with God as well as with others. However, it is still possible for such a state to not be sufficiently ordered to such a degree that it corresponds to a physical reality which eliminates biological death and disease entirely. The event of the fall was a result of a race of fallen beings coming from elsewhere in order to tempt man to become as gods. Now, one may ask as to why the state prior to the fall of man was not perfect. The answer has to do in part with the principle of vibration. The degree to which the broken pieces of the fallen state are reordered and reentangled corresponds to their vibration, with higher vibration corresponding to a lesser degree of fallenness. The reason that our universe is not in a state of perfection yet is because we have not reached a high enough vibration yet. However, other such universes that do exist in our reality have a high enough vibration. Many of these other universes or planes are at a high enough vibration that they would be perfect worlds, as we would imagine it, without death and so forth, with a far greater degree of mind dependency at a much higher vibration. It is from one of these planes that so-called fallen angels originally fell into this plane. Being in this plane, though, we do not have the same kind of perfection we would see in the heavenly plane. This is why it is often seen that heaven is better. It's simply because heaven has a higher vibrational frequency, and so it would be better than our current plane, and it's why those who enter heaven must first have the same level of vibratory frequency, which is another way of saying that they must no longer be in the fallen state. With all this in mind, we now have a full explanation of how the fallen state works and how salvation works. The fallen state is simply a result of the inner knowledge of good and evil, and this knowledge in turn is a result of fractured consciousness. This fractured consciousness is the origin of the fallen state, and those in such a state cannot by their own efforts escape from it. The fallen state can only be fixed from outside the corrupted system, and the best candidate to do that is the one who is in a perfect unfallen state, which is the mind of the all. The mind of the all, or God, would then fix a person by reconnecting these broken pieces with God, which then allows for sanctification to take place in a person, so their fallen state can be reversed, and they may achieve salvation and have the same unfallen nature as God.